Hey guys, it's Buddhagem, and this will probably be the first of many videos like this, answering questions from my mailbox. If you have taken the time to write me a question in a private message, chances are I haven't answered it, and I'm sorry, but usually it's because the questions would require quite a lot of work on my part to answer in any kind of detail, and I'm only answering it for that one person. Well, you know, nothing wrong with that, but what I've thought would be better is to answer them in a video format so that other people might benefit from them as well. So with that, I've went through and I'm gonna pick some of the better questions, and I'm gonna try to get to all the questions eventually. So we'll see how many we can take in this first of Buddhagem's Mailbox. We'll begin with a question from Samsonlovesyou, and he asks, "Hey David, I was hoping you could help me. I remember one of your videos. It might have been part of the series on democracy. Kudos on that, by the way. It was much needed and well executed. Where Chomsky was being interviewed by a journalist. You pointed out that said journalist deliberately failed to follow up Chomsky's incredible claim that the right to speech wasn't part of the American Constitution until the 1960s, I believe. I was hoping you could remind me of what video it was so I could check again. And if you could have any further background to his claims, it would be really helpful too. I hate to be incredulous of Chomsky since I've never known him to make a claim he can't cite references for, but I have to check this one out due to the nature of it. I doubt many people would take me seriously if I made such an outrageous claim on the basis of, but Noam said it. Thanks if you find the time to hit me back." Here's the clip of Noam Chomsky talking to Charlie Rose about freedom of speech.
We have freedom of speech. I mean, freedom of speech is not on the Bill of Rights. In fact, up until the it's not. Up until the 1960s. In fact, the legal battles about freedom of speech are mostly in the 20th century. And there was no real legal protection for substantial freedom of speech, actually, until the 60s. In the 1960s, the Supreme Court finally, first in the course of the Civil Rights Movement, then later in the decade, finally realized a level of legal protection of freedom of speech that, to my knowledge, doesn't exist in any other country. And a large part of it grew out of the activism of the Civil Rights Movement.
Most of us have been indoctrinated with the idea that our benevolent forefathers gave us this gift from heaven of freedom of speech, but the reality is a little more complex than that. The Supreme Court, for instance, never ruled on the constitutionality of any federal law regarding the free speech clause until the 20th century. As Howard Zinn points out in his A People's History of the United States, the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights shows the quality of interest hiding behind innocence. Passed in 1791 by Congress, it provided that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Yet 7 years after the First Amendment became part of the Constitution, Congress passed a law very clearly abridging the freedom of speech. This was the Sedition Act of 1798, passed under John Adams' administration, at a time when Irishmen and Frenchmen in the United States were looked on as dangerous revolutionaries because of the recent French Revolution and the Irish rebellions. The Sedition Act made it a crime to say or write anything false, scandalous, or malicious against the government, Congress, or the President with the intent to defame them, bring them into disrepute, or excite popular hatreds against them. The Alien and Sedition Act of 1798 was then followed by the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918. Thousands of people were arrested, one of the most famous being the case of Charles Schneck, who had during the war published leaflets challenging the conscription system that was in effect, the draft. And this is the famous line you always hear from Oliver Wendell Holmes about yelling fire in a crowded theater, a clear and present danger. A real blow to freedom of speech. And as I wrap this up, let me just remind people that, the freedoms and the rights that we enjoy aren't gifts from above. They're the result of organized mass struggle. And freedom of speech is a perfect example of that. If you really want to get an idea of this, take a look at the arrest record of someone like Emma Goldman, who was arrested time and time again for speaking. Take a look into the history of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, where in the early 20th century, cities all across this country passed ordinances denying IWW leaders the right to speak. And you know what the Wobblies did? They formed mass contingents and sent people to these cities and towns to speak, and they were arrested. 150 members of the IWW in 1912 were thrown into jail in San Diego. you can really learn a lot about freedom of speech by delving into this history. Like I said, there'll be links in the sidebar, and I hope you'll check them out. The next question is from SpeedyOJ, who asks, "What's up, man? I enjoy your videos, and I just have a question about anarchism. I'm confused here and would appreciate the help." So from what I understand, that anarchism can't really be achieved overnight, so to speak, at least in our country, and if it did, the people would probably tear each other apart. Therefore, the people would have to be prepared for anarchism, and that probably starts with everyone having an education. So since the poor can't afford an education, would the first step be a social policy of free education for everyone? In other words, would socialism be the first step to achieve libertarian socialism, aka anarchism? Thanks for your question. This is going to sound rather odd, but I don't think most anarchists are interested in achieving anarchism, if that makes any sense. It's not a thing that we're seeking to achieve. It's more about the process. To quote from Noam Chomsky's essay Notes on Anarchism, the anarchist historian Rudolf Rocker puts the matter well when he writes that anarchism is not a fixed, self-enclosed social system, but rather a definite trend in the historic development of mankind, which, in contrast with the intellectual guardianship of all clerical and governmental institutions, strives for the free, unhindered unfolding of all the individual and social forces in life. Even freedom is only a relative, not an absolute concept, since it tends constantly to become broader and to affect wider circles in more manifold ways. For the anarchist, freedom is not an abstract philosophical concept, but the vital, concrete possibility for every human being to bring to full development all the powers, capacities, and talents with which nature has endowed him, and turn them to social account. The less this natural development of man is influenced by ecclesiastical or political guardianship, the more efficient and harmonious will human personality become. The more it will become the measure of the intellectual culture of the society in which it has grown. So what does that all mean? I mean, you're asking basically, what is the first step? And there really is no first step. It's going to depend on who you are, where you're at, and what your interests and inclinations are. At some level, I see in this question, though, it's something that I think people ask a lot, and it's essentially, what does everybody else need to do so that we can move forward? And unfortunately, there's no magic answer to that. What we really have to ask ourselves is, what can I do? And what we can do as individuals is join with others, educate ourselves and the people we know and our family, our friends, the stuff I do here on YouTube and other places, become actively involved in our communities, in the things that we're passionate about, whether it's healthcare, prison reform, the list is endless, bringing the troops home from around the world. There's no shortage of things to do or activities to be involved in, but there's always a shortage of people willing to take the time and make the effort to get involved. So, the first step, I think, is essentially getting active and involved. And that's one of the things I try to emphasize on this channel. It's not about, anarchism isn't about abstract ideas and principles, these philosophical discussions that go on endlessly and mean nothing. As Karl Marx pointed out, philosophers' job is to interpret the world, but the job remains to change it. And that's our job. It's a process that continues. It's a struggle against concentrations of power, illegitimate forms of authority. And, the ways that we move forward are pretty basic, but they're not easy. And we continue to struggle. We have to have a long-term vision of the change that we hope to see. So I hope that answers your question somewhat. And I appreciate the questions. You can always send me a private message here on YouTube, and I have more questions to filter through, but I'm running out of time here. But this is the first in a series of, me basically answering questions out of my mailbox here on YouTube. Appreciate it, and I'll see you guys again real soon.